So this is just going to be a short video to show you yet another way of suppressing the reflection component that you get from transparency in Bryce, and I'm going to use the first video as a starting point, so we've already got our material set up. So I'm going to go into the material lab for the dragon, and I'm just going to reset this material, but then keeping that blob handy there so that we've got a transparent material. So as I was explaining, when you've got a transparent material in Bryce with a refractive index, it starts to incorporate a bit of reflection when the camera view is approaching, well, as it gets tangential, like we're clipping at a very low angle here across the surface of the material, then it incorporates a bit of reflection. Now what I want to do is suppress that reflection, so I've just got the transparency properties. I'm not sure why you would want to do that. I'll just turn the diffusion to 0 there. But it might prove useful later on, and it's certainly worth knowing in terms of controlling the material properties. So what I want to do now is just remind you of the way that the Metallocene control works. So if I put a colour into the diffuse channel here and then add Metallocene, what it does is it blends in this colour, particularly at the point it's strongest where the camera is arriving and view is 90 degrees to the surface, and then it gradually becomes more mirror-like as we work our way around. This is a useful property for us because it's operating through the reflection channel and doesn't affect our transparency. The diffuse colour affects the transparency, but the Metallocene doesn't. It only affects the reflection component, which is what we're seeing there. That's the reflection component, because if I reduce this down to, I could say go below 100, so we're at the other end of the scale, between the range of 0 and 100 you get no reflection component, and here you can see the Metallocene is having no effect. So I'll just restore that to there. So what we're going to do is overdrive this Metallocene control, and that will cause whatever's in the diffuse channel to suppress the reflection. In an extreme case, when you've got a lot of reflection, and we're not dealing with transparency here, it just sort of switches the reflection off, which is what we're looking for. Obviously we want it to do it with only a very small variation in the diffuse channel. So by setting this at almost white but not quite, we should be able to, because the Metallocene control is being driven so high, it will still respond to this. So Camtasia's caused that menu to hang around. That should have gone, but I'll just go into the deep text editor because I need to be here anyway, and modify this highly negative output to a highly positive one by including a second component, using difference here, and then modifying this second component to nothing. I don't need the octaves. And so what happens now is the difference being this being highly negative, that being more or less nothing, gives us a highly positive output. And then with this highly positive output, I'll plop that in Metallocene. I'll say we've got alpha scaling there, so we can control the level of Metallocene, and you can see it's just making this mirrored surface fully black. So the diffuse output, although it looks white, isn't quite white, but it will be enough to let our transparency operate without any visible change, and as a result of that you can see that it switched the reflection off as it did before, with this very high level of Metallocene, or even with lower levels, because the control is so being driven so far by that function. So you can see now we've killed the reflection again. Other things that, well, you might want to see that if you do turn this up to fully white, which will mean no effect of the Metallocene going into the reflection, then you do get your reflection back. So there you go, there's the reflection back there. Also, let's go back, we'll just set this down, I can do this in HLS a little bit quicker, to 254. There is the option of offsetting this against a powerful reflection. So if I now drive the reflection with this, which is now a positive output, I can set the reflection up, and then I can set the Metallocene down. I'll try 0.1, so that the two are competing. Bearing in mind that the Metallocene still has this center focus where it brings more through into the middle. The reflection is now at a very high value, and the Metallocene is now also a very high value, but it's more focused in the middle. So even though this looks white, it's not quite white, so that's making all the middle very, very dark. The reflection's gone high, so it's created quite a sharp transition as it moves from the Metallocene not quite being able to defeat the reflection within this scale. So you can create this bright outline that is purely as a result of reflection. Well, we can modify things like the transparency to get different effects here. So if I wanted, I'll just introduce a bit of colour here. I don't know what colour to introduce. We'll try this greeny colour like so. Then you get some interesting effects as a result of these competing. So this white outline is not dependent on diffuse light. That is dependent on what it's reflecting in the background. Now I can demonstrate that, for example, by turning the atmosphere off. I could set the atmosphere fully black and then get rid of this infinite plane, and our dragon disappears. There's no diffuse component on that. There's no diffuse response in the material. So as far as even though there's diffuse light shining in here, nothing can respond. If I modify the atmosphere, even so it's just producing a very small amount of light, it will be picked up and amplified by the amplifying reflection property, so you can see you get this outline. So I was wondering if we can make the material, because it's a transparent material, now scatter that outline through itself, which is possible, I think, because if I modify this material property of the specular halo and make that a fully white specular halo, that can be used to drive the render option in premium effect. I'll just set this down to a low level so we can preview it, of blurry transmissions. I'll set the maximum ray depth down a bit as well to speed things up. So it should now be possible to get this outline, which is stimulated by the reflection here. Bearing in mind I can turn the sun light off just to prove this is just the outline that's causing this, to actually be transmitted through the body, because it's transparent material, of the dragon, and create a different sort of effect. As you can see, it's not very green, which I was hoping for, possibly because I might need to modify the volume material to see if that brings more green into it. It's a little bit more green now, but still not very green. But with it not having any shadows to cast, it's just operating on the glass-like material there. I think that I can probably just move that around a bit and get an interesting render out of this. I was just hoping to get a little bit more of a green effect here, which is obviously the thresholds are quite critical because of using these extremely highly powered outputs. It could easily upset the balance of things. So there you go, that's brought a bit more green in from this outline. That's an amplified reflection of this background, which is only at a very low level of output, but because of the high power of the reflection property, you get that effect. So I'll just provide a higher resolution rays per pixel for the final output, let that to render out, and I'll use that as the image for the video. Let's see how long it's going to take. Ooh, 10 minutes, that's not too bad. Okay, so that's the end of the video really. I'm just going to let that render out. You can see the final image, and that's another way of suppressing the reflection in the glass material, and it looks like I've gone on to make some kind of effect from it, which is nice. And well, hopefully you'll find that interesting and experiment with it yourself in your own renders.